Winston Churchill, at 19, wears the uniform of the 4th Queen's Own Hussars after leaving the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, as a second lieutenant in 1895. He would later rise as Britain's Prime Minister, leading the nation through World War II. Winston Churchill as a child in the late 1870s, years before his rise to leadership. Born on November 30th, 1874, he would become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1940 to 1945, guiding Britain through the darkest days of World War II. Clara Hitler, mother of Adolf Hitler, pictured in the late 19th century in Austria. Born in 1860, she devoted her life to her family until her death in 1907. Her son Adolf would later become the dictator of Nazi Germany, leading the world into World War II. Adolf Hitler, far right, raises the Nazi salute with visitors at the Berghof in Berchtesgaden in 1942. At the center stands Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, later executed for war crimes, while cameraman Walter Frentz captures the regime's propaganda. Joseph Stalin, born Joseph Vissarionovich Dzugashvili, pictured as a child in Gori, Georgia, in 1892. Born in 1879, he would later rise as a Bolshevik revolutionary and Soviet leader, ruling with absolute power and leaving a lasting mark on the 20th century. Joseph Stalin, born Joseph Vissarionovich Dzugashvili, sits among classmates at the spiritual seminary in Gori in the 1890s. Born in 1879, he once trained for the priesthood, but instead became the Soviet leader who ruled with iron control until his death in 1953. Mahatma Gandhi, as a young man, years before leading India's independence struggle. Born in 1869, he would become the creator of Satyagraha, mass civil disobedience rooted in nonviolence, that inspired movements for freedom across the world. Mahatma Gandhi stands with his associates in front of his law office in South Africa in the early 1900s. It was here that he first developed his philosophy of Satyagraha, the non-violent resistance that would later guide India's fight for independence. John F. Kennedy stands outside with his close friend Lem Billings, his classmate from Choate and Princeton. Decades before becoming the 35th President of the United States, Kennedy is seen here in his youth, shaped by friendships that lasted a lifetime. John F. Kennedy arrives on the liner Bremen after a summer in England, on his way to Harvard to continue his studies. Years before becoming the 35th U.S. President, he was a young student shaping the ideas and vision that would later define his leadership. Franklin D. Roosevelt walks confidently in the 1910s, during his years as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Long before becoming the 32nd President of the United States, he was already building a career that would lead him to guide America through crisis and war. Franklin D. Roosevelt sits at his desk around 1932, preparing for the challenges ahead. Soon to become the 32nd President of the United States, he would launch the New Deal to fight the Great Depression, and later lead the nation through World War II. 2. Fidel Castro, at 17, plays basketball in 1943 at the Colegio de Belén in Havana, Cuba. Before leading the Cuban Revolution in 1959 and ruling for decades, he was a spirited student whose determination on and off the court hinted at his future drive. Fidel Castro, center, In 1947, leading the student movement Action Caribe in Cuba. Still a young law student, he was already deeply involved in political activism, foreshadowing the revolutionary path that would culminate in the Cuban Revolution of 1959. Ernesto Che Guevara, as a child in Argentina around 1940. Born in 1928, he would grow from this boy into a Marxist revolutionary and key figure of the Cuban Revolution, becoming one of the most iconic and controversial symbols of rebellion in the 20th century. Barack Obama shoots the ball in 1979 while playing guard for Hawaii's state champion Punahou School basketball team. Years before becoming the 44th President of the United States, he was a determined student athlete with a passion for the game. Barack Obama escorts his classmate Laura Kong during the Punahou School graduation ceremony in Honolulu, May 1979. Soon heading to college, he was a bright young student who would later rise to become the 44th President of the United States. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, later known as Lenin, pictured as a schoolboy in Simbirsk in 1887. Born in 1870, he would go on to lead the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, becoming the founder of the Soviet state and a defining figure of the 20th century. U.S. President Ronald Reagan shakes hands with a boy in Moscow's Red Square on May 31, 1988, as Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev looks on. This meeting symbolized a thaw in Cold War tensions, marking a historic step toward improved U.S.-Soviet relations. Mikhail Gorbachev, General Secretary of the Soviet Union, stands with Günter Schabowski of East Germany's SED Central Committee as they pose with a young boy in East Berlin. In the 1980s, Gorbachev's reforms would pave the way for the end of the Cold War. Albert Einstein as a 14-year-old boy around 1902, years before his groundbreaking theories transformed physics. Born in Germany in 1879, he would later develop the theory of relativity and become one of the most influential scientists in history. The Sklodowski children in 1870, from left. Zosia, Hella, Manya, later known as Marie Curie, Joseph, and Bronya. Born in 1867, Marie Curie would go on to pioneer research on radioactivity, becoming the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the only to win two. Marie Curie stands beside her sister Bronya Sklodowska in their youth. Born in 1867, Curie would later become a groundbreaking physicist and chemist, the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and the only person to win in two different sciences. The Freud family photographed around 1876, with a young Sigmund Freud standing among his siblings and relatives. Born in 1856, Freud would later become the founder of psychoanalysis, revolutionizing psychology and leaving a lasting mark on modern thought. Sigmund Freud with his mother Amalia in 1872. Born in 1856 in Austria, Freud would go on to become the founder of psychoanalysis, developing groundbreaking theories on the human mind that reshaped psychology and influenced modern culture. Thomas Edison at 14 years old in 1861, long before his fame as an inventor. Born in 1847, Edison would go on to hold over 1,000 patents, creating innovations like the phonograph and electric light bulb that transformed modern life. Thomas Alva Edison, shown here as a young man, would become one of America's greatest inventors. Born in 1847, he developed the practical electric light bulb in 1879 and built a legacy of innovation with over 1,000 patents that shaped modern technology. Pablo Picasso, at 10 years old in 1891, pictured in his native city of Malaga, Spain. Born in 1881, he would later revolutionize art as the co-founder of Cubism, becoming one of the most influential and celebrated painters of the 20th century. Frida Kahlo, as a student in 1926, captured before her rise as one of Mexico's most iconic artists. Born in 1907, she transformed personal pain into powerful art, becoming celebrated worldwide for her surreal, deeply emotional self-portraits and legacy. Samuel Clemens, later known as Mark Twain, at 15 in 1850, holds a printer's composing stick in Hannibal, Missouri. Born in 1835, he would become one of America's greatest writers, famed for classics like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Ernest Hemingway, around 1917, seen as a young man before his literary career began. Born in 1899, he would become one of America's greatest authors, known for works like The Old Man and the Sea and A Farewell to Arms, earning the Nobel Prize in 1954. Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, in their first photograph together at a fair in Porte d'Orléans, Paris, June 1929. Both would become leading intellectuals of the 20th century, shaping philosophy, literature, and existential thought with their groundbreaking ideas. Jean-Paul Sartre, as a teenager in 1921, years before he became a leading French writer and philosopher. Born in 1905, he would later develop existentialism, profoundly influencing literature, philosophy, and political thought throughout the 20th century. Virginia Woolf in July 1902 as a young woman, years before becoming a pioneering English writer. Born in 1882, she would later shape modernist literature with works like Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse, leaving a lasting influence on 20th century fiction. Virginia Woolf, with her father, author and critic Sir Leslie Stephen, in 1902. Born in 1882, Woolf would later emerge as a leading modernist writer, reshaping English literature with groundbreaking novels like Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse. Charlie Chaplin, at age 7 in 1897, stands among his classmates at Hanwell Poor Law School in London. Born in 1889, he would grow up to become one of the world's most beloved comic actors and filmmakers, creating iconic characters that shaped early cinema. Charlie Chaplin stands with Douglas Fairbanks, D.W. Griffith, and Mary Pickford, founders of United Artists. Born in 1889, Chaplin would become one of the greatest comic actors and filmmakers, leaving an indelible mark on cinema with his iconic performances and direction. Marilyn Monroe, born Norma Jean Mortensen in 1926, begins applying her makeup in 1948. Years before becoming an iconic Hollywood star, she was transforming into the glamorous figure who would captivate audiences worldwide and define mid-20th century cinema. Elvis Presley, born in 1935, stands between his parents outside their home in Tupelo, Mississippi, in 1945. Years before becoming the king of rock and roll, he was a young boy whose passion for music would soon transform popular culture worldwide. Anne Margaret Olson, born April 28, 1941, stands at 5 years old in a dark dress with a white collar. Years before co-starring with Elvis Presley in Viva Las Vegas, she would become a celebrated Swedish-American actress and singer, known for her vibrant screen presence. An early incarnation of the Beatles is photographed at the Arnhem War Memorial in the Netherlands on August 16, 1960, possibly by John Lennon. Years before becoming global music legends, the young band was honing their skills on the road to Hamburg, shaping the sound of a generation. James Dean, in gym shorts and sneakers, prepares to pass a basketball as a youth. Born in 1931, he would later become an iconic American actor, famed for his rebellious roles in films like Rebel Without a Cause, leaving a lasting mark on Hollywood and popular culture. James Dean plays on his uncle and aunt's farm in Fairmount, Indiana, around 1943. Born in 1931, this young boy would grow up to become a legendary actor, known for his rebellious charm and unforgettable performances in films like Rebel Without a Cause. Audrey Hepburn models a new collection at an Amsterdam fashion show on November 2, 1954. Born in 1929, she would become a legendary screen star, celebrated for her elegance, charm, and iconic roles in films like Breakfast at Tiffany's and Roman Holiday. Benito Mussolini, born in 1883, was an Italian politician, journalist, and leader of the National Fascist Party. Years before rising to power, he developed the political ambition and ideology that would later make him the dictator of Italy, shaping the nation's history through the early 20th century. Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit, Indian Health Minister, arrives in Croydon, England on September 1, 1938. Beside her is her niece Indira Nehru, later Indira Gandhi. Years before their political prominence, these women were already stepping onto paths that would shape India's future leadership. Jawaharlal Nehru, circa 1906, pictured in his Harrow School uniform. Born in 1889, he attended Harrow from 1905 to 1907. Years before becoming India's first Prime Minister, Nehru was a young student preparing for a life that would shape the nation's future. Jawaharlal Nehru, later India's first Prime Minister, stands among schoolboys at the headmaster's house, Harrow School, London, in 1907. Born in 1889, he is pictured alongside future British General Harold Alexander, long before their influential roles in history. A young Yasser Arafat poses with a group of Chinese people wearing Western clothing in China during the 1940s. Years before becoming the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Arafat was already cultivating experiences and connections that would shape his future political path. Kim Il-sung in April 1932 in Korea, pictured as a young man before rising to power. Born in 1912, he would later become the founding leader of North Korea, establishing a regime that would shape the nation's history for decades. Kim Il-sung in 1945, years before the founding of North Korea. Born in 1912, he would establish the nation in 1948 and rule it until his death in 1994, shaping its political system and leaving a lasting imprint on the Korean peninsula. Benazir Bhutto in April 1972, outside the home of Mr. and Mrs. John H. and Belle Wade Bowen in Greenville, Mississippi. Born in 1953, she was studying in the United States and would later become Pakistan's first female prime minister, leaving a profound impact on the nation's politics. Buzz Aldrin, Center, exits a church among a group of people. Born in 1930, he would later become one of the astronauts of the historic 1969 Apollo 11 mission, walking on the moon and marking a milestone in human space exploration. Oscar Wilde in 1870, captured in a colorized photo as a young man. Born in 1854, he would become one of Ireland's most celebrated writers and playwrights, famed for his wit, literary genius, and enduring influence on English literature. Oscar Wilde in 1878, during his time at Oxford University. Born in 1854, he would become a celebrated Irish dramatist, novelist, poet, and critic, renowned for his wit, literary brilliance, and enduring influence on English literature and theater. Cassius Clay, at 12 years old, strikes his best pugilist stance. Born in 1942, he would later become Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest boxers of all time, renowned for his skill, charisma, and influence, both inside and outside the ring.